I thought love could stop people from leaving. I thought promises could protect a relationship. I thought waiting a little longer would change everything. But I was wrong about all of it. The morning he left was cold and grey. Rain fell softly on the streets. People walked fast with umbrellas in their hands. Cars moved slowly through the wet roads. Everything looked normal. But my world was breaking apart. I stood outside the train station with Daniel. He wore a dark jacket and carried one small black bag. His hair was wet from the rain. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix. It was deeper than that. Neither of us spoke for a long time. I held 2 cups of coffee in my hands. One for me, one for him. But the coffee was already cold. "Your train is late," I finally said. "Yeah," he answered quietly. His voice sounded distant, like his mind was already somewhere else. 2 weeks earlier, he told me he wanted to leave the city for a new job. He said he felt lost here. He said he needed a fresh start. At first, I thought it was only a short trip. But then he stopped talking about us. One night, I asked him directly, "Are you coming back?" He looked down at the floor for a few seconds before answering, "I don't know." That answer stayed inside my chest like a stone. Now we stood together under the station lights, pretending everything was fine. I tried to smile. "Maybe this is good for you." "Maybe," he said. I wanted him to say something else. I wanted him to hold my hand and say, "Come with me." Or, "I changed my mind." Or even, "Please wait for me." But he said nothing. A little girl ran past us inside the station. She laughed while her father chased after her. Daniel watched them quietly. Then he suddenly spoke. "You remember the beach trip last summer?" I nodded slowly. "We went there for my birthday. We rented a small room near the ocean. The air smelled like salt and grilled fish from the nearby shops. At night, we sat on the sand and listened to the waves. That night, Daniel held my hand and said, 'No matter where life goes, I want you there too.' I believed every word. Now, standing in front of him again, I almost wanted to laugh at myself. "I still have the photo from that trip," I said softly. He smiled for the first time that morning. But the smile disappeared quickly. The station speaker announced the train arrival. My heart dropped immediately. "This is it," he whispered. The train lights appeared in the distance. People around us started moving. Some hugged goodbye. Some checked their tickets. Some looked excited for new places. I only felt fear. Daniel turned toward me slowly. "I'm sorry," he said. Those 2 words hurt more than anything else. I shook my head quickly because I did not want him to see me cry. "It's okay," I lied, but it was not okay, not even close. He stepped forward and hugged me tightly. His jacket smelled like rain and coffee. I closed my eyes and held on to him for a few seconds longer than I should have. Then he pulled away. "I'll call you," he said. I nodded. But deep inside, something already knew the truth. He walked toward the train without looking back. I stood there until the train disappeared. The rain became heavier after that. Still, I did not leave. Some foolish part of me believed he might come back out and say he made a mistake. But the station doors never opened again. Every morning started the same way. I opened my eyes and checked my phone. Every night ended the same way too. I stared at the screen and hoped his name would appear, but it never did. The first few weeks after Daniel left felt unreal. I still walked past his favorite coffee shop after work. I still bought strawberry yogurt because he liked it. I still turned my head every time someone wore a dark jacket like his. My body moved forward, but my heart stayed behind at that train station. At first, my friends stayed close to me. "You just need time," my best friend Emma said one night. We sat together in my apartment eating takeout noodles. Rain hit the windows softly. The room smelled like soup and garlic. Emma watched me carefully. "Have you heard from him at all?" I looked down at my phone beside the bowl. "No." "Then maybe you should stop waiting." I forced a small smile. "I'm not waiting." But both of us knew I was lying, because every part of my life still belonged to him. His grey sweater stayed on the chair near my bed. I never washed it, because it still smelled faintly like his cologne. Sometimes, after long days, I held it close while sitting alone on the floor. It was embarrassing, but loneliness makes people do strange things. Months passed slowly. Winter became spring. Spring became summer. Still nothing. Sometimes I became angry. Not loud anger, quiet anger. The kind that sat inside me while I washed dishes or waited for the train home from work. How could someone say, "I love you" for years and disappear so easily? How could he leave me carrying all the memories alone? One afternoon, I finally deleted our chat messages. Or at least I tried to. I sat on my couch staring at the screen. My finger hovered above the delete button. Thousands of messages filled the conversation. Photos of dinners, voice messages before sleep, small jokes nobody else would understand. Then I found one message from 2 years earlier. "Promise me you'll never leave without saying goodbye." My chest tightened immediately. I locked my phone and started crying before I could stop myself. In the end, I deleted nothing. That night, Emma came over again. "You need air," she said firmly. "Come outside with me." "I'm tired." "You're always tired." I wanted to argue, but I knew she was right. So we walked through the night market near my apartment. The streets glowed with warm yellow lights. People laughed near food stands. Music played softly from small stores. Life moved normally around me. That almost made things worse. Emma suddenly stopped walking and pointed across the street. A couple stood together near a flower shop. The boy fixed the girl's scarf carefully because the wind was cold. Such a small thing, but my eyes started burning immediately. Emma looked at me gently. "You miss being loved." I shook my head slowly. "No," I whispered, "I miss who I was with him." That was the first honest thing I said in months, because before Daniel left, I used to laugh more easily. I used to make plans for the future. I used to feel excited about life. Now every day felt grey. Even my apartment changed. Dust gathered near the windows. Dirty cups stayed in the sink longer than before. I stopped buying flowers because nobody saw them except me. One Sunday morning, I opened my closet and saw the blue dress I wore on our beach trip. I touched the fabric quietly. Then I noticed something strange. The dress no longer smelled like ocean air or sunscreen or summer. It smelled like nothing. For some reason, that hurt more than losing him. Because memories fade slowly. Not all at once. Little by little. Until one day you realize you are holding on to shadows. That night, I sat alone by my window and watched the city lights flicker outside. 2 years had almost passed. Maybe Daniel was never coming back. I could not sleep that night. The city outside was silent, but my mind was loud. Old memories returned one after another. And for the first time in 2 years, I stopped running from them. Rain touched the window softly as I sat at my kitchen table. A small yellow lamp lit the room. The clock on the wall moved slowly toward midnight. I stared at an empty piece of paper for a long time. Then I finally wrote his name. Daniel. My hand trembled immediately. I almost stopped there, but something inside me felt tired. Tired of pretending I was fine. Tired of carrying words I never said. So I kept writing. At first the sentences came slowly. I hate the way you left. I hate how you made promises you could not keep. I hate that I still miss you. Tears fell onto the paper before I noticed them. I laughed bitterly at myself. 2 years later, and I still cried over the same person. Outside, thunder rolled quietly through the sky. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment. Then another memory appeared. It was the night before he left. Daniel and I sat on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by half-packed boxes. The television played softly in the background, but neither of us watched it. I remember asking him carefully, "Are you unhappy with me?" He looked shocked immediately. "What? No. Then why does this feel like goodbye?" He stayed silent for too long. That silence answered everything. Back in my kitchen, I opened my eyes slowly. For 2 years, I told myself he left because life was difficult, because he was confused, because he needed time. But deep down, I knew another truth. He stopped choosing us long before he walked away. That realization hurt more than I expected. I picked up my pen again. "I waited for you every day," I wrote. "I defended you when my friends told me to move on. I kept believing your silence had a reason." My breathing became uneven. Then anger finally rose inside me. Not explosive anger, painful anger. The kind that grows quietly after disappointment sits too long in the heart. "You left me carrying everything alone," I continued. "You left me with questions you never answered. You disappeared while I stayed frozen in the same place." I stopped writing and covered my face with my hands. The apartment felt unbearably quiet. At some point, I walked to the kitchen and made tea. The water boiled softly while rain continued outside. I stood there staring at the steam rising from the cup. Then my phone buzzed suddenly. My heart jumped immediately. For one foolish second, I thought it was him, but it was only Emma. "Are you awake?" she texted. I stared at the message for a moment before replying. "Yes." 3 dots appeared instantly. "Do you want company?" I looked around my dark apartment. Papers covered the table. My eyes felt swollen from crying. I answered honestly, "No, I think I need this tonight." A minute later she replied, "Okay, but don't be cruel to yourself." That sentence stayed in my mind after the screen went dark. Don't be cruel to yourself. I returned to the table and read the letter again from the beginning. The words looked raw and exhausted, but they also looked true. Then I reached the final line. "I loved you honestly. I just wish you had loved me bravely." My chest tightened after reading it. For a long time, I stared at the paper silently. Then something unexpected happened. I suddenly realized I did not want to send it anymore, because the letter was never truly for Daniel. It was for me. It was proof that my pain existed. Proof that I was abandoned. Proof that I survived it. Slowly I folded the paper into a small square and placed it inside my desk drawer. I did not feel healed. I did not feel happy. But for the first time in 2 years, I felt something different. I felt tired of waiting. And maybe that was where healing finally began. Healing did not arrive like sunlight in movies. There was no magical morning when everything stopped hurting. There was no moment when I suddenly forgot Daniel. Instead, healing came quietly, in small, ordinary pieces. A few days after writing the letter, I woke up earlier than usual. The sky outside still looked pale and sleepy. Birds moved between the trees near my apartment building. For some reason, I did not check my phone immediately. That small change surprised me. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling for a few seconds. Then I got up and opened the windows. Cool spring air entered the room slowly. It carried the smell of rain and fresh bread from the bakery downstairs. The curtains moved gently in the wind. My apartment still looked messy, but suddenly I noticed how tired the space felt, like me. Clothes covered the chair near my desk. Old coffee cups sat near the sink. Dust gathered beside the bookshelves. And Daniel's grey sweater still rested exactly where I left it months ago. I walked toward it quietly. For a moment, I only stared. Then I picked it up carefully and held it against my chest. The fabric no longer smelled like him. It only smelled like time. I sat on the edge of my bed with the sweater in my hands. Memories returned immediately. Movie nights, beach trips, lazy Sundays when we cooked together badly and laughed about it later. For a second, I almost started crying again. But then another thought entered my mind. If I kept building my home around old memories, how could a new life ever enter? That question stayed with me all morning. So I started cleaning. At first it was simple. I washed dishes. I opened old mail. I changed my bed sheets. I wiped dust from the windows. But slowly the cleaning became something deeper. I packed away movie tickets from our dates. I removed old photos from the refrigerator door. I folded the grey sweater carefully and placed it inside a box. Not because I stopped loving him, but because I finally understood something important. Love should not trap a person in the past. Around noon, Emma arrived unexpectedly with coffee and sandwiches. The moment she entered, she stopped walking. "Wow," she said slowly, while looking around the apartment. "It looks different in here." I laughed softly. "I know." Sunlight filled the living room now that the curtains were open. The room felt brighter, bigger somehow. Emma placed the coffee on the table and looked at me carefully. "You look different too." "I barely slept," I joked. "No," she said gently. "You look lighter." Her words caught me off guard. Lighter. I had not felt light in a very long time. We ate together near the window while people walked below on the street. Emma talked about work drama and her terrible manager. Normally, I only pretended to listen. But this time, I actually laughed. A real laugh. The sound surprised both of us. Emma pointed at me immediately. "There she is." "Who?" "You." That sentence stayed in my chest long after she left. That evening, I found my old paint set hidden inside the closet. I used to paint before Daniel entered my life. Small landscapes, city streets after rain, coffee shops with warm lights inside. But somewhere during our relationship, I stopped. Not because he asked me to. Life simply became smaller without me noticing. I spread newspapers across the floor and opened the paint tubes carefully. The familiar smell filled the room instantly. Then I painted until midnight. Not perfectly, not beautifully, but honestly. Blue skies, yellow lights, a girl standing alone beside the ocean. When I finally stepped back, paint covered my hands and shirt. And for the first time in years, my heart did not feel empty. Later that night, I walked to the convenience store near my apartment. The city air felt cool against my skin. Couples passed by laughing softly. Cars moved under glowing streetlights. Normally, scenes like that hurt me, but this time something felt different. I still missed Daniel sometimes. I still carried sadness. But the sadness no longer controlled every part of me. As I waited at the crosswalk, I suddenly realized something strange. That entire evening, I had not thought about whether he missed me too. The light turned green. And as I crossed the street alone, I felt a quiet kind of peace follow beside me. 2 years after Daniel left, I returned to the train station alone. The building looked smaller than I remembered. The old coffee stand still stood near the entrance. People rushed past with tired faces and heavy bags. Somewhere above me, the station speaker announced another arriving train. Life continued normally here, even after heartbreak. I stood quietly near the same spot where we said goodbye. For a moment, old memories returned again. The rain, his voice, the way I watched him disappear without looking back. But this time, the pain felt softer, like an old scar instead of an open wound. I reached into my bag and pulled out the letter I wrote months earlier. The letter I never sent. The paper looked worn now from being opened and folded too many times. I read the final line one last time. I loved you honestly. I just wish you had loved me bravely. Then I smiled a little, because I finally understood something important. Daniel was not the only person who left. Somewhere during those 2 years, I left myself too. I stopped dreaming. I stopped laughing easily. I stopped living fully. But slowly, piece by piece, I found my way back. A train arrived loudly beside the platform. Wind rushed through the station as the doors opened. People stepped off carrying flowers, backpacks, and tired expressions. And suddenly, I no longer felt like someone waiting. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside my bag. Not as a symbol of pain, but as proof that I survived it. Before leaving, I closed my eyes for a few seconds and whispered softly into the noise of the station. Goodbye, Daniel. Then after a small pause, I added, and thank you, because loving him changed me. Losing him changed me too, but surviving the loss taught me who I really was. I turned around and walked toward the station exit. Outside, the evening sky glowed orange and gold above the city streets. People laughed nearby. A bicycle passed me. Somewhere in the distance, music played from a small restaurant. The future still felt uncertain, but for the first time in a very long while, uncertainty no longer scared me. I smiled gently and kept walking forward.